Right, welcome back to another episode of Beyond the Brief. And today I'm super excited to have a very special guest with us today, which is Amy Smith, who's Communications Director from the Ardonagh Group, massive global insurance company. Amy, thank you so much for coming along today. Absolute pleasure to have you here.
Oh, my pleasure to be here.
You found it okay?
I did.
We've dragged you out on a cold January day.
Way out east.
Yeah, way out east, I know. So where's Devon's Road? No one ever knows, but here we are, we found it.
No, all good, thank you. And my first podcast as well.
Well, there you go.
Yeah, very special.
Indeed, thank you. Well, thanks for joining us on your first podcast. Amy, I've got you here today because we obviously go back a number of years. And today we want to really kind of tap into this question of like what it takes to lead in B2B marketing. You've got 25 plus years experience, something like that, working in marketing and now in your communications director role at the Ardonagh Group. So I'm going to do the awful thing now, which is ask you for the benefit of the audience just to do that like horrible elevator pitch of like, who are the Ardonagh Group?
Yeah.
Just tell us very briefly in your own words so that they know the business and your role within it.
Yeah, of course. Okay, so the Ardonagh Group is actually a really interesting business. It's a huge global insurance distribution platform. And that ultimately means across many different countries, we have many different businesses, all in the insurance industry, predominantly broking. And they are out there in the various industries and sectors, inventing insurance solutions for their clients. And their clients can be anything from someone that is buying their car insurance, for instance.
Yeah, like me.
Yeah, absolutely. Through to, I don't know, the next space program that needs to ensure
the weird and the wonderful.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So it's really
so
varied.
Hugely diverse.
Absolutely, yeah.
And lots of brands underneath.
Yes.
Because there's been a lot of change at the Ardonagh Group, I think, hasn't there?
Yeah, absolutely.
And you've kind of been on that journey. You've gone from different businesses, which I think have been brought up over time by the Ardonagh Group.
Yeah, that's right. So again, another part of that interesting model is it has grown hugely through M&A. It was originally, or its kind of its first story was as a UK broking business. And that changed very quickly. And through mergers and acquisitions over the last 7 years, it has turned into this huge organisation. And of course, because it's through mergers and acquisitions, you do buy these independent businesses that are sat there very good at what they do in their
very
market.
Niche areas and markets,
And they will have their own brands. And they come into the Ardonagh family. The model also is quite different in places. For some, it's we bring those businesses in, they keep their brands. Ultimately, we just want them to keep on doing what they're really good at. And we invest and we nurture and we protect and we support. And then in other areas of business, and certainly one of the areas that I was in, because I was part of a business that was bought by Ardonagh.
Yeah.
We went through that journey of actually having multiple brands, but for our specific market, deciding that actually the multi-brand strategy wasn't the one for us, and going through a huge rebrand process and all that involves as well. So I couldn't even tell you how many brands actually we've got in total within the group.
Always more being added. And
absolutely, yeah.
So how many people roughly within Ardonagh Group? Obviously thousands.
About 12,000 people globally.
Yeah.
So it's a big beast.
Absolutely.
It's a big beast.
So I'm going to turn it to a personal angle for a minute. How did you get into marketing?
Oh my goodness. Well, I left school without much of a plan other than I really fancy getting into this thing called PR. I wasn't really sure how to go about that. And my parents were definitely very much not going to let me kind of sit on my bum thinking about it. I needed to go out and get a job. So I joined a school leaver program for Churchill Insurance, who did this amazing scheme at the time. But it was actually I was there on the phones with the headset, doing car insurance claims, and handling that kind of stuff.
Did they have the dog back then?
Yes. Yeah.
Oh, brilliant.
Absolutely. Yeah.
There you go. There's a great example of a brand doing well with their marketing.
Yeah. Well, and and also it's really funny because I always laugh. A lot of my job now also involves doing kind of people, culture, communication type thing. Even now, I could probably tell you most of the values because they were so
strong.
Embedded in what we did. But anyway, so I did that for about 18 months. And then all of a sudden they advertised that they were looking for a marketing and PR assistant in the marketing team. Went for the job.
And the rest is history.
The rest is history. Absolutely. So I was lucky in that way. And I was also very lucky in that I had a boss who really believed in investing in me. So they paid for me to do my IDM qualifications at the time. And got into the grounding. Interestingly, though, once I'd been in that role for a while, I decided that actually perhaps the PR thing wasn't as interesting, but the marketing bit really was. And so I went down that route. And at the time, I mean, we did have the nodding dog and all that kind of stuff, so it was great. But I actually worked as part of a team that were affinity marketing as well. So doing a bit of, yes, what would you call it? Brand stretch, I suppose, like looking at travel insurance, credit cards, loans, and looking into that as well as working.
So like new market opportunities.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes. And so using that brand to see,
how can you leverage it?
Absolutely.
What direction can we move in?
That was super interesting and also really gave me a really intense kind of experience in terms of, it's not just about the dog, it's looking at the numbers, it's really getting into the stats, it's understanding what your target market is, etc. And again, very lucky because of course they used big grown-up agencies, which for my first experience in the marketing world was just like this education of its own.
So a steep learning curve.
Yes. Yeah.
But that's pretty incredible. There's not many people that come sort of straight out of university, go into a sector, let alone a role, but, particularly a sector, and then, stay there. And I think you've maybe deviated a little bit in between, but you've predominantly been in insurance the whole period.
Yeah.
So is there anything within marketing, within insurance that is particularly unique, do you think, to that sector?
Yes. And also in terms of people say insurance and they think of, well, quite often they think about personal, absolutely.
Where your brain immediately goes.
And I think one of the unique things about it is that there are so many facets to it. I think in the early days, because as you so kindly pointed out 25 years ago.
Sorry.
In the early days, it was quite data heavy, which wasn't necessarily such a common thing, but because certainly because I started in personal lines insurance, it's an annual purchase, so when your people are going to need to buy.
Repeat customers. Yeah,
there are certain products that they have to buy because you have to have car insurance if you drive it. So like the decision making process around it is, I think, perhaps not unique, but certainly not that common for other industries. It's hugely competitive, and for something that, let's be honest, no one sits there going, "Oh, career insurance will be really sexy." Like no one does that. So you have to like really tell a story in a different way and in a relevant way, and with it and reach that balance of something that you want people to be comfortable with, and recognise without crossing the line of actually what you're there to do. And then if I look at perhaps the world that I've been involved in for the last kind of 8 years, which is a bit where they are insuring spaceships, etc., those clients are other brokers. And so you've got this hugely sophisticated audience that know what they want, when they want it, demanding and technically, I'd say, really sophisticated.
And that must be very different to a personal insurance model because,
massively.
Let's be honest, has anyone who's buying car or house insurance ever fully read the policy document that
No,
goes
that's
with
right.
it.
Yeah,
Do you know what I mean? Like,
yeah, that's right.
we just sort of take a lot of it as,
Yeah.
you know, okay, like you say, I need this product, I have to have it. How much is it going to cost me?
Yeah.
You know, let me look at the top line cover. Yeah, that seems to tick the right boxes.
Yeah.
Then you get sent some historically long 78-page policy document, which of course no one ever reads, which must be a little bit different if you're in the space race and insuring a rocket or whatever, where they probably will read the whole policy document.
Absolutely. The stakes are incredibly high.
Very high.
No, it is quite different, and like I say, it's because it's different drivers. I mean, I've also been really lucky that I've worked on lots of different brands as well, and so some of them have got real heritage. So, you know, I've worked with the Prudential General Insurance brand. You know,
well known, great heritage brand.
Absolutely.
Very
and
recognised.
So you have to become you want to become really respectful of something that's been around for a really long time, and you're kind of the guardian of that for a short period of time. Equally, let's say my marketing background in the early days was really around affinity marketing, and worked with charities, worked with you know, some of the high street names as well that would sit behind, or rather put their brand on an insurance scheme. And I think that also is quite an interesting way to work as well, because it's not yours.
Yeah.
But
so would that be like a Tesco's who then have a product for insurance that they brand under their own, but really they're not the underwriter or the, you know.
Yeah, exactly that. Absolutely. And that's, like I say, that's a completely different dynamic as well, because you have to, you definitely have to get to know brand guidelines at that point. But equally, again, you're talking to their audience and their clients, and again, comes back to that.
The importance of data and understanding the customer.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So there's two things you talked about there, which I really want to pick up on because I think they're really interesting. Number one is competition. So obviously, you just said insurance, probably one of the most competitive industries that there probably is out there, which must have a huge impact on the approach to marketing. And I think, you know, B2B is one of these things. I think the B2C world, marketing can sometimes feel a little bit more straightforward in a way, because people want to buy products. You know, the product's either, you know, good or bad. You know, you can rate it, people have an opinion. You know, it's in a way a lot easier to kind of wrap a marketing model around B2C, whereas with B2B and you're selling a product or a service, that comes with a whole lot of different challenges. So how, from your experience through your career, you know, how have you seen the approach that you might take to try and, you know, get round that problem of, you know, competition is rife. We still have to stand out. How do we connect with that audience?
Okay.
Big question.
Yeah. So, like I say, certainly for a significant period of my career, a lot of that would be using research and the data and all kinds of things like, you know, the profiles of the type of clients that you might use, consumer research, all of that goes into what someone needs, because that's also, you know, that is ultimately it. And even in financial services, particularly because it's important, because you also have a real duty of care as well to make sure that you've got the right products and the right way of applying for them. You know, all of that stuff is really important. And that's always the ideal, that you are able to do that in a really well researched, really well understood, data-driven way of working.
Do you think that have things changed in terms of the way you're having to market now? Because I feel like there's been a bit of a shift from this kind of, you know, list of products and services, which is, you know, obviously really almost impossible to kind of try and differentiate over. If you're in a competitive market, you know, people have probably got very similar products with very similar price points. So standing out on that basis obviously presents a huge amount of challenges, and probably 10 years ago or more, that's exactly how people would approach it. Whereas now I think as consumers, we have a sort of different expectation of like how we're going to, you know, choose a brand to work with, or, you know, how, like you say, we go back to car insurance, you know, how am I going to pick one car insurance provider over another? You know, am I just looking at price? You know, what are those driving factors? So I suppose that brand element really has to, you know, perform much harder.
Yeah, and I think it does now particularly. So B2B, when I started out, B2B marketing was almost seen as like the poor cousin in the marketing world. You know, I'm not saying that's right, but that definitely
back then that's how it was.
Absolutely was the case, and that has really transformed, certainly in the last decade, I would say, because the world is just more connected. So whereas perhaps 20 years ago, there might have been a very definite way about how someone would go through a purchase process in their personal life versus process that they would go through or a decision-making process they go through in their business life.
Yeah.
I think the edges have become blurred. Now, it's still definitely, I would say, far more complex in the B2B world because, you know, if I think about the company I work for, you know, you will have potentially procurement involved. You will have, you know, the stakes are really high for people in there. The process is definitely different. But if you think about all the channels that people use, everyone can see everything all the time. And I think that's actually the challenge, which is you have to make a decision about where ultimately you want to be in a B2B world, because the answer cannot be, oh, well, I don't know, if Coca-Cola are on TikTok, then that should mean that,
oh yeah, we're going to be as well.
Absolutely.
You've got to pick the right channel, understand where your audience are.
And that could be really challenging when you have got people going, oh well, you know, this is the next big thing.
Look at what these guys are doing.
And I suspect that every marketeer would absolutely understand that challenge. But I think it is, though, that because all those different channels have blurred the lines somewhat, that B2B does, in some ways has become simpler, but in other ways has become more complicated almost in a way. But like I say, I think the important thing, certainly for me, is just seeing that shift from it's not poor cousin of the marketing world. You know, actually it's right up there and people really understand that it can be massively creative and it can be just as exciting and as interesting and as fast moving actually as any 100%. Other facet of
and actually, because you've got to work harder to stand out, because, you know, it is more difficult than traditional B2C marketing environments. That's exactly what I think actually pushes things faster in that sector.
And I think certainly I've also been lucky. I mean, sometimes there are days when it doesn't feel quite so lucky, but working with brokers and direct sales forces as well. And that's another dynamic that you get in B2B, in my experience. I know you'll get it elsewhere. So you have got a bunch of people that, again, know what they're doing, really know what they're doing. They have the relationship, they have the direct relationship with your client base and your prospect base. And so actually you're so reliant on them as well, because they ultimately are going to be what people judge your brand by. They are a massively important part of that sales funnel. So, you know, you can't do something over here, you know, turn the switch on over here without having engaged those people there.
Yeah.
That is also something that brings a new dynamic. I think, again, with the various different contact points that you might have, certainly in the industry that I'm in as well, you really have to get that bit plugged in properly. They're the people that get the first bit of feedback on good, bad, or indifferent. They also have their own drivers and their own motivations as well. So, you know, so you have to pick through all of that too. But that can add a real different dynamic to a marketing campaign as well, because they're kind of going to live or die by that.
So we're seeing huge amounts of change in, well, marketing at the moment in particular. We can't talk about marketing without mentioning AI at the minute, because it's in the news constantly, particularly this week. In fact, has been an interesting week with AI. Is that influencing your world at the moment? And if so, to what degree? Are you embracing it? Is it emerging? Where is the Ardonagh Group with AI and with your role in particular in communications? That's
that hot topic everywhere, isn't it?
Yeah. I'd love to know.
Do you know what?
You see it.
I wish I was far more technically savvy to give you a far more eloquent answer to this. The bottom line is AI is coming everywhere.
Yeah.
If on the actual insurance technical side of it, they're doing some really cool things that at some point I'll get to talk about, I'm sure.
But it's top secret at the minute.
or just that I don't think I'd do it justice if I tried to explain to you now. But some really cool solutions for clients, which obviously is, as a marketer, that's what I want to know about, because that's where the story is. From a marketing perspective, honestly, we've kind of scratched the surface. We're nowhere near being able to leverage all the capabilities. I think there's a healthy suspicion maybe around it in terms of where is it right to use it, where isn't it right. And look, we've all seen the horrid examples when the same competing marketing teams have used clearly the same AI program to write a press release or write the LinkedIn post. Like, that is horrid. But like I say, we've really only scratched the surface.
Yeah.
There's
that kind of discovery phase at the minute, which I think we're all in at the moment, which is because it's constantly in the news. Everyone's talking about it. It's all over social media. Like, you can't get away from it at the minute. Obviously, we've had the DeepSeek news this week as well, which obviously now, of course, everyone's all over that. Oh, I must compare it to ChatGPT and see how that.
And it is interesting because again, in our industry, there are various different forums, and I'm part of a marketing forum in the London market, and we'll quite often get together just to have a bit of time for people just to learn about something else that's going on, or understand what's going on in the industry. And AI came up at one of these events last year, and it was really interesting. In a room of probably 15 marketeers, the approaches were so different. There were some companies that it was an absolute no, you cannot go near it, that's it. Others that were really getting into it, and others that were somewhere in the middle. And I think perhaps it's just my personality type, but I think I like to have a healthy level of suspicion, but don't let that stop you from being able to see what it could do, what it can do. Because as with everything, if it more efficient, or if it actually helps you make better decisions, or it does speed up the boring jobs that don't
automate
really take
some of the repetitive work. Yeah, exactly.
The very non-creative stuff for a second, or even if it is just again the photo where you think, God, if that bag was red, that would be perfect.
Yeah.
Just silly things like that. But like I say, that's just scratching the surface, and I'm doing a massive,
No, I think it's a fascinating area to speak to other marketing people about, because you're right. Like, it's so different having one conversation from one person to another. And obviously we all know it's going to be, a tool that we can all utilize. And as you say, hopefully take away some boring process, or, make some work easier, make us faster at doing particular tasks.
Which is the really boring part of it. I'm sure there's going to be much more exciting stuff.
Probably one of the most useful, like in reality. I think where I'm really interested in it is, marketing has ultimately become about being more connected on a human level with people. In B2B, moving away from selling products and services, trying to tap into the emotional sell more, how brand plays a role, in all of that process. So for me, there's a real sort of butting of heads with AI in that world, because, how can we be human if we're then getting a computer to, do the work or do the creative or, whatever it is. So it will be really interesting to see how it plays out, and it will be different for different industries and sectors, I'm sure. I'm not worried about losing my job just yet, but
no, I don't.
Ask me again in 5 years, when we're all like, oh my God, marketing doesn't exist anymore. Yeah. I love that idea that you're obviously coming together with other marketing professionals and, brainstorming, bouncing ideas off each other and things like that. Are there any other like big things that are going on in your world from a marketing perspective that are really driving change at the minute?
Feels like there's always something going on that's driving some kind of change. I think actually it comes back to something that we've already talked about, which is competition. So particularly in my industry, where you have got mergers and acquisitions happening, and you've got companies joining other companies, and that competition becomes far more concentrated. Yeah, absolutely. And that does mean that you have to be pretty nimble and pretty agile around how you're going to approach your business development and sales and marketing with that. So that's definitely a trend for us. I think probably linked to that is relationships. Again, big part of the business that I worked in at Ardonagh for a long time is really relationship based, and a bit to the point around AI is never going to replace that. And so how do you work with that without
taking away people? Or
and just making sure that you always keep that really lovely balance in there as well, that respectful balance, but also we're there to try and find different solutions, and how do you approach that? And it's everything's marketing at the end of the day.
People often don't realise that, though, do they?
That's right. And it really is. So, I another part of my role around communications, and particularly working with people, one of the things I always say is it's your non-verbal communication as well. If you get in the lift and you're not smiling, and you're a senior leader, then people are going to walk out that lift going, well, they're stressed about. And it's the same. It's the same if you're going to see your clients and it's a business development conversation, and it's a marketing approach as well. And it's making sure that you are liaising with your PR department. I mean, some businesses, certainly I've run departments where marketing and PR are all one and the same. Yeah. But I've also worked in teams where it's not, and actually it's making sure that that's all joined up as well. Because if you've got a marketing campaign going on over here, but perhaps your external relations person is over here, like that doesn't work. And so I've always been a big believer that actually the marketing team in any organisation, and certainly any team I've been part of, they've also got this huge responsibility to try and act as a connector as well in there. You can't just sit there and say, right, I'm going to run this campaign, or I'm working with this team and we are going to do that. Yeah. You do have to have the ability to sit back and say, okay, so what's the bigger picture? How does that all link in with any of perhaps the external facing and indeed the internal facing messaging, and make sure that that's all aligned.
With that in mind, is there a campaign or anything that you've done in the last, say, 12 months that you think's been, you're either particularly proud of or has worked particularly well?
Yeah. So, I'm really sorry, Tim, because I'm not going to give you a campaign example particularly. I think I was lucky enough to work on a rebrand project, actually, which we can stretch it out to say it's a campaign.
No, it doesn't have to be a campaign. That was just an example. So a rebrand is a great example.
Yeah. And it was, fantastic to work on. So the premise was, part of Ardonagh that I actually worked for had multiple brands that had come together in a similar market. And actually where we got to was our people, our brokers and our clients were saying, this isn't really working for us, having the multiple different people on different brands, but ultimately in a similar place. So we took the decision. Well, actually, we took the decision to do the research. Is actually what we did.
Yeah, it's a good starting point. Yeah,
yeah. Look, it's really easy, and I would say B2B is particularly bad for this, where you do have people that just kind of go, "Well, we'll just do this." Yeah, or I'd like it to be blue today. We took the right approach. We did some research. We had some hypotheses around what we might do, and ultimately what it came back was, you need to cut down the number of brands that you have. Let's make it really easy to make it really easy for us to work with you. So we did that. The brand that we were working with was a brand called Price Forbes. It's not a big commercial insurance, not going to be a well-known insurance brand for anyone that's buying their insurance policies direct, but over 100 years old, huge heritage in the market that it's in, and it needed a bit of a refresh ultimately. And that we also needed to do that because we had to bring people that hadn't worked under that banner previously, and we had to bring them with us because we were ultimately asking them to give up brands that they had been proud of, that they had worked under for a while, that they had an affinity with. It was a huge piece of work. We probably took us 12 months to implement from start of the research to the finish, but we got it right, and we got it right from a number of different angles. In terms of, we did the work to make sure that we had the words to help our brokers explain it to their clients. We had their words that we could include in it. Operationally, because that's the bit, again, that no one ever likes to talk about because it's not that exciting, but operationally, we rolled it out in a controlled way. I'm not saying we were perfect, oh God, no, but we did it thoughtfully and we engaged with our people to get that done.
And I think that's one of the most challenging things to do. So that's really interesting, like taking people on that journey.
Yeah.
How did you do that? I mean, that might be a really complex, piece of work, but I think it's probably one of the things that people often do really poorly or don't think about, and it gets forgotten about completely. And suddenly, there's been a rebrand, and it lands, and everyone's like,
today you were this, now you're this,
now you're this,
but here's a stress ball. But look, we've all kind of seen it, right?
So were there some key things that you did in order to take people on that journey?
Well, you know me, so you won't find this answer surprising. I talk to people.
Great.
It's you have to engage. I mean, if I think about the hours that I spent on Teams calls, in team meetings, doing presentations and talking people through it, being really open with them about what was going to happen, what we needed them to do. I am one of life's warriors, and quite often I prefer to have everything almost, I know that's going to be perfect, now I'm going to tell you about it. But that doesn't work, because what you ultimately end up doing, is giving too little time to get someone over the line with it. Whereas we started talking really early, those initial conversations, and I was quite honest with people to say, look, this is what we think it looks like, but I'm going to but we will keep you in the loop on that, because if that is going to change, you need to know, and we'll always tell you what's going to happen. We also gave the power to them in terms of clients, right? So how do we engage with them? Because I can't sit there and say, the answer is that we're going to email everyone. Yeah, absolutely. Again, it's a relationship business.
Yeah.
So we really engage with people to say what's right, and there's no one right answer. So we had to really be quite flexible with our approach.
So just listening to people's opinion, giving people a voice.
Yeah, and understanding that not everyone's going to want to get on the bus. Yeah. So thinking about how you deal with that in a respectful and sensitive way. So I would say for me, that was the number one thing. And actually, if I did it again, I think I'd even say I'd want to talk to people earlier as well. Now, sometimes that's not possible, especially when you're dealing with sensitive subjects and all that kind of thing. But yeah, look, I would say in the last 12 months, that that is the thing that stands out in terms of, one, it was a huge amount of work, but and also so wide ranging across the organisation. Again, this is where I go back to marketing has this role that sometimes people don't necessarily think about, but it was so wide ranging across IT, operations, HR, the whole lot, which means life's never dull, right? And again, is really relationship based.
So I just want to wrap up on that note, because I think there's some great lessons there, particularly from that piece of work. Obviously, we've talked about challenges of competition, how to stay ahead, the importance of research, data, understanding your audience, and also that tied in with that piece around communications, which I know is really central to your role. I love that about taking people on the journey. I think that's massively, a mistake that people really frequently overlook. I think it's also very hard for probably especially big organisations like the Ardonagh Group, not to just do things from a kind of really narrow perspective. It's been such a pleasure having you on, Amy.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining me on your first podcast,
Yeah.
hopefully the first of many. You can come back and talk to us another time about another subject.
Lovely.
But yeah, really thanks so much for spending the time today. I know how busy your life and world is. And thank you guys for joining us today. We'll definitely see you again too. Give us a follow if you can. Bye-bye.